You're listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and it's April 1st, 2021. No, this is not an April Fool's joke, what you're about to hear. Look, the minimum wage is one of those things that sounds great. Everybody should have a minimum wage, but who's going to pay for it? Who can afford to pay for it? In theory, you can only be paid for what you're worth and in terms of income that you bring to your organization, assuming it is a for-profit organization. Hey, if it's a nonprofit and you depend on the largesse of others, you could be paid $50 an hour and nobody really cares. But if there's a bottom line, if a profit has to be turned, then minimum wage, particularly $15 an hour, is going to be fatal to some businesses. And even if it isn't fatal to the businesses, one thing's been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt: higher minimum wages lead to higher minority unemployment and low skill unemployment. Well, if we need to prove it again, then we need to prove it again. I want to know your opinion on it. Why don't you send me an email to kl@kerrylutz.com. With us today is Wayne Winegarden, Senior Fellow in Business and Economics at the Pacific Research Institute. And looking at the site, you find him over at pacificresearch.org. Wayne, great to have you on the show. We haven't had you before, but the fight for 15, it sounds like such a noble, lofty cause, and yet there are nefarious motivations, nefarious parties fighting for it, and it's really going to hurt the people that they claim it's going to help the most, isn't it?
It is. I think it's incredibly important. We've got to stop focusing on policies, intentions, and focus on the actual outcomes. And the outcomes of minimum wage, and I think you set it up perfectly, there's no free lunch. So it has to come from somewhere. So either you're going to have more business losses, you're going to have, because of higher costs, or it's going to go through to products, and product prices will go up, or you're going to fire people and you're going to have more unemployment. But there's a cost to everything, and there's no free lunch.
Absolutely. And look, the purpose of a minimum wage job has kind of changed in society. Well, maybe it hasn't changed that much. Initially, it's for lower skill employees. You start out in a low skill job, you get paid minimum wage, you learn valuable skills like showing up on time, like looking presentable, like not telling your boss what you really think of them, keeping your mouth shut. I mean, these are all valuable skills that employees at every level of the corporate ladder have to learn, but minimum wage employees generally don't know them. Now we've got a permanent underclass of minimum wage workers, if you will, greeters at Walmart, et cetera. But the intent of all business is to get rid of these workers. Doesn't the fight for $15 minimum wage just speed up the process of substituting capital for employees?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, first, I think we need to recognize who are minimum wage workers, because the majority are teenagers. And beyond that, employees making minimum wage are a very, very small subset of the entire workforce. So this idea that there's a widespread people earning the minimum wage and supporting an entire family, that's just not true. I mean, there obviously are cases, and we're a country of 300 million people, so there'll be large numbers. But when you talk about systemically, you're not talking about this widespread use of everyone in the country earning minimum wage, and those who do in the majority are obviously teenagers. So, and you're kind of setting it up as a way to learn skills. That's exactly right. I mean, you're learning how to work hard. You're learning kind of the processes. And so those create very important skill sets that help people move up and kind of, develop their careers into kind of much higher paying jobs. And in fact, that's what you see. Capital is, it should be a complement to labor. And you were talking about that when you raise the minimum wage, it can become a substitute. And that's exactly what you've seen. Now, when you walk into many restaurants, as opposed to walking up to a counter, you'll see a kiosk. Well, those kiosks can actually become substitutes for labor. So if you raise the cost of labor, you're going to see more of those kiosks in order to essentially cover the cost of the higher minimum wage.
And let's not forget here, it's so disingenuous, the whole argument. I live in Palm Beach County, Florida. Now, the wealthiest spot in Palm Beach County is Palm Beach, the island, as we call it. And there, like, the idea of a $15 minimum wage is laughable. Probably the least paid person there that I know of probably gets $20 to $25 an hour, and they don't live there. But then the poorest individual or poorest city in the county, which is 50 miles away, is a place where a $15 minimum wage, you would think you hit the lottery, right? It's really, it's amazing that we could even be having this conversation, because even in one county, the uniform imposition of a $15 minimum wage totally doesn't work.
Right. And I think that's an important point. Look, there should be no minimum wage. And to the extent that people need income support, that should be done through our income support programs, which need complete reform. But that's a different topic. But now we're talking about what's the consequences, and that's going to vary greatly. So on the island, as you put it, if you raise the minimum wage to $15, well, that's irrelevant, because if everyone on the island is making more than that, then it doesn't matter. Setting a minimum below what people are already making is an irrelevant policy decision. So you may see no impact. It doesn't mean that minimum wage has no impact. It just means you've set it so low that it's irrelevant. But when you go to places where that becomes a binding constraint, what you're going to see is those are the places where unemployment will increase. And I think it's very important, because many studies that attempt to show that minimum wage increases have no impact, they'll tend to look at employment across the entire population. But like we said earlier, only a small percentage of people earn the minimum wage. So you've got to focus on the people that are impacted by it, to find a study that says, we raised the minimum wage and doctors didn't lose any employment. That's irrelevant, because, a medical doctor, high skilled, earning well above it. So it doesn't matter. And so when you go to those counties where there's wages are much lower, the costs are going to be much higher.
Exactly. And my producer is yelling at me, say the name of the town. Say the name of the town. It's Belglade. And the reason why it's got some of the lowest income is it's got a bunch of work camps for convicts and agricultural workers who probably are going to be exempt from the minimum wage anyway. And a lot of illegal aliens, if we're still allowed to say that, or undocumented workers, whatever euphemism you'd like to use. That's what's going on there. So $15, man. Hey, everybody's going to be drinking Chianti for dinner when that happens, but not really, because most of them are exempt anyway. They're not going to get the benefits of it. We've seen countless studies on this, right? We've seen, Wayne, countless studies on it, and they've all shown, any ones that were done honestly, there's always a decrease in employment of minority youths and low-skill workers, right? It always ups the unemployment rate eventually.
Don't just survive, thrive. The Financial Survival Network.
Lumina Gold, ticker symbol LUM on the Toronto Venture and LMGDF on the OTC, is yet another of legendary mining investor Ross Beatty's Lumina Group. It's advancing the largest primary gold deposit in Ecuador. The resource is estimated to contain 16.7 million ounces of gold and 2.2 billion pounds of copper. At just $7 US per ounce gold equivalent, it trades at an incredible 13% of its net present value. More good news is on the way with an updated PEA study expected in Q2 of 2020. It has unparalleled infrastructure. There's grid power to camp with plentiful, inexpensive hydropower available. It's close to 2 ports and is just 8 kilometers from a paved highway. Water is plentiful. It's at low elevation, and the closest community, which is very supportive of Lumina's effort, is just a 7-kilometer ride. With all this going for it, it's likely to follow the typical Ross Beatty formula, which means big returns to shareholders. Find out more and sign up for notifications at luminagold.com. That's Lumina, Lumina gold.com.
This is the Financial Survival Network, the information you need to thrive now more than ever.
Well, that's definitely one of the outcomes. I mean, there's other ways it can be manifested. I mean, there was one great study that showed it was looking at McDonald's, and it was looking at there was about 300 state and local minimum wage increases, and so they were trying to figure out what the impact was. And you saw that the minimum wage increased, and then what happened? Big Mac prices went up to compensate. And so that brings up another really interesting question, because if you raise the minimum wage, and that just leads to a increase in prices, and if the prices that increase tend to be the goods that minimum wage workers are going to purchase more often, then in reality, by raising the minimum wage, you've increased costs for those people, and in the amount they can actually purchase, the real goods they can purchase doesn't change. So you're not even helping those who get the raise, because their purchasing power is the same. And for those who lost a job, they're doubly worse off. They have no income, and costs of the things they're going to purchase has gone up. So, and that's part of the problem, is that there's so many ways that the adverse consequences can be manifested that it could be hard to keep track of, because there's lots of ways that people will respond to these adverse incentives.
Yeah, for sure. It ups inflation, ups the cost of running businesses. It doesn't apply to most of the population, but it does because union contracts are often written so that the wage calculation that their employees are going to get, their members are going to get, is far higher than the minimum wage, but it's based on a multiple of the minimum wage. And that's why unions are always gung-ho supporting the minimum wage increase for whatever it might be.
Right. And that's a kind of an amplifier of that policy, right? So that the union membership had been going down for many, many years, but we seem to be on the upswing now. And so to the extent that you have that multiplicative effect, now we're going to spread the economic consequences much broader, and you're going to see much, larger adverse impacts, because now, even though you're only applying it to a small part of the population, the contracts are going to expand that. And so you're really going to see much slower job growth, higher price increases, so that much broader part of society is now going to feel those consequences. So that, and that's where you get some of these amplification policies, which can make one bad policy choice much more costly for society as a whole.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. You're doing great work fighting this thing. It's really not a fight. It's just a question of education, because if you really understand the ramifications and the unintended consequences of a boost in the minimum wage, then you're going to understand that the people it's intended to help are the ones that get hurt the most. And that's really the shame of it. Wayne, is best place to find you? Where is the best place to find you these days? Is it Pacific Research Institute?
PacificResearch.org. Yep, that's the best place. We have a wonderful blog right by the bay. It's called where we we'll address many of these types of issues, and California specific issues as well, budget issues, education, any of those topics you can find at our blog right by the bay or at PacificResearch.org.
Yeah, and you got some of the top-notch people who are really examining all this. We didn't even get into the point that all of these programs need to be revamped, because they're done. Most of these subsidy programs for underemployed, unemployed people, the poor, were all created during the 60s and in the in the late 30s and early 40s, and they're very inefficient. They don't even reflect technology today. They don't reflect anything. So when you come back again next time, we're going to talk about revamping all of the social safety net programs. I remember Governor William Weld, before he became a crazy person, once said that the safety net should be a net, not a hammock. And we're turning it into a hammock these days, boy. Aren't we ever? Anyways, if you got a question for Wayne or myself, will you please send me an email to kl@kerrylutz.com. Don't forget, sign up for our newsletter, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Wayne, we'll have you on again real soon. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.